Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2023 윤후정통일포럼, now celebrating its 10th year. Well, it's December and deep in winter, and which is also the last month of the year. So I must ask, how was your 2023? Well, usually in the end of the year, we look back on the year that has passed and also look forward to the year that's to come. So by taking this opportunity, we would like to take this moment to reflect on the steps towards the reunification and peace that Iwa has taken, and also draw a vision for new decades to come. So thank you, all of you, once again for being here with us at the 윤후정통일포럼 this year, which holds significance. So today we're going to begin the forum with the opening remarks prepared by President Kim Eun-mi on behalf of the Ewha Women's University. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome her to the stage with a big round of applause.
감사합니다. 안녕하십니까. 이화여자대학교 총장 김은미입니다. 오늘은 윤후정 통일포럼이 10주년을 맞이한 아주 특별한 날입니다. 이 기쁜 날 함께하신 이화학당 장명수 이사장님, 김선욱 총장님, 법인 이사님들을 비롯한 내외빈 여러분과 우리 학생들, 이화가족 여러분 환영합니다. 윤후정 통일포럼은 섬김과 나눔의 기독교 정신을 바탕으로 한반도의 분단 현실을 극복하고 동북아시아의 평화를 이루기 위한 교육과 토론의 장으로서 선생님께서 평생 모으신 재산을 본교에 기부해 주신 것을 기반으로 2014년 5월 만들어졌습니다. 윤후정 선생님은 대한민국 최초의 여성 헌법학자로서 여성 교육과 여성 지위 향상을 위해서 평생 헌신하셨고 본교 총장, 명예총장, 이사장으로 봉직하셨습니다. 이번 포럼의 주제는 평화 구축을 위한 여성들의 역할입니다. 세션 1에서는 전 세계 분쟁 상황에서 여성과 여아에 대한 UN의 림 알살렘 UN 특별보좌관 보고관님께서 기조연설을 해주실 것입니다. 불행하게도 오늘도 계속되고 있는 전 세계 전쟁과 분쟁 상황에서 취약한 여성과 여아들의 문제, 그러나 역량 강화를 통해서 평화 구축의 주축이 될 수도 있는 여성과 여아에 대한 말씀을 전해 주실 것입니다. 오늘 대답은 우리 이화 출신으로 유니세프, UN 동티모르 사무소를 비롯하여 전 세계를 다니면서 수많은 현장에서 일을 하셨던 우리 강민휘 WHO 전 국장님께서 대담을 맡아주실 것입니다. 세션 2에서는 이화의 북한학과 통일 연구를 돌아보고 이어지는 대담은 해외에서 북한학, 통일학 연구가 어떻게 이루어지고 있는지를 조망해 보기 위해서 세계적 연구의 구심점 역할을 하고 있는 연구소의 소장님들을 모셔보았습니다. 한국에서 연구는 여러 특장점도 있지만 또한 제약도 있기 마련입니다. 이와는 달리 해외 연구는 어떤 특징을 갖고 어떤 특성을 가지고 발전해 왔는지를 비교해보고 조망해보는 오늘 이 자리는 작년부터 우리 학교 통일학연구원에서 준비를 해오고 계셨습니다. 세계적으로 중요한 일본의 이정원 와세다대학교 한국학연구소 소장님, 독일에서 독일의 경험을 갖고 한국을 연구하고 계신 이은정 베를린 자유대학교 한국학연구소 소장님, 영국 맨체스터 지역 탈북민이 가장 많이 소재한 곳에 위치한 센트럴 랭캐셔 대학의 한국학연구소 임소진 소장님께서 발표해 주실 예정입니다. 오늘 10주년 포럼이 있기까지 지난 10년 동안 본교 통일학연구원은 윤후정 통일포럼을 주관하고 진행해 오셨습니다. 그동안 통일학연구원장을 역임하신 최대석 전 부총장이 오늘 나와 계십니다. 잠깐 네, 오늘 와 계십니다. 그리고 현재 통일학연구원장을 맡고 계신 박원근 교수님 이하 여러 교직원 선생님들의 수고와 땀방울이 어려 있습니다. 모두 감사드립니다. 오늘 포럼을 통해 평화와 통일을 염원하는 사람들의 풍성한 의견을 나누고 또 토론을 하고 또 우리가 한 걸음 더 가까이 가는 자리가 되기를 바랍니다. 오늘 참석하신 모든 분들께 하나님의 특별한 축복이 함께 하시기를 기도드리겠습니다. 오늘 아주 좋은 토론의 장이 되고 또 통일과 평화를 염원하는 우리 모두가 함께 다짐하는 그런 시간이 되기를 바라겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, President Kim, for your opening remarks. She has mentioned about how important today's meeting is. Well, I hope that this forum, the 윤후정 Unification Forum, will continue to serve as a platform and also play a role in the frontier in the opening of peace, prosperity, and also the unification on the Korean Peninsula. Well, this forum is an open forum, the unification discussions that begin with the dedications of 윤후정, the first female constitutional scholar in Korea, and who was also the 10th president of the Ewha Women's University. So we're going to first take a look at the past 10 years of the 윤후정 Unification Forum through the screen.
분단의 극복과 민족의 재결합은 이제 우리 민족 최대 과제임을 더 이상 미루어서는 안 될 때가 온 것 같습니다. 저는 마음 한구석에 늘 기회가 된다면 통일 문제 해결에 조금이라도 보탬이 되는 일을 하고자 소망해 왔습니다. 이화여대는 1990년 초부터 통일에 관한 연구, 담론, 남북 여성 교류 등에 관하여 논의하기를 시작했으며 앞으로는 본교 북한학과와 통일학연구원 등과 협동해서 이러한 통일의 성취 과제뿐만 아니라 통일 과정에서 일어날 그리고 통일 이후 발생될 여러 가지 사항들에 대해서도 좀 더 구체적 연구, 정리가 필요하지 않을까 생각합니다.
앞으로 윤후정 통일포럼이 한반도 평화 번영 그리고 통일을 열어가는 데 프론티어의 역할을 해주시길 기원하며
윤후정 선생님은 우리 사회의 가장 큰 과제를 분단의 극복으로 판단하셨고 이는 북한 지역과 북한 주민에 대한 대한민국 헌법의 실현을 의미한다고 강조하셨습니다. 이러한 윤후정 선생님의 높은 뜻을 기리기 위해서 이화여자대학교는 2014년부터 한반도 통일과 또 동북아시아 평화 구축에 관한 교육과 연구 그리고 인식 제고를 위한 담론의 장인 윤후정 통일포럼을 개최하고 있습니다.
한반도의 통일과 평화를 이끌어가는 자리를 선도해온 지난 10년간의 윤후정통일포럼. 이화는 윤후정통일포럼을 통해 우리 사회 곳곳에 숨어있는 여성인적 자원을 발굴, 개발하여 한반도 문제 해결의 중심이 되고 있습니다. 섬김과 나눔의 기독교 정신을 바탕으로 한 통일 한반도 구축에 관한 교육과 연구, 그리고 인식 제고를 위한 장은 앞으로도 지속될 것입니다. 통일 한반도의 비전을 현실로 만드는 길에 윤후정 통일포럼이 함께하겠습니다.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, through the video, we were able to see that Iwa has been taking initiatives for in the North Korea and also in the unification-related issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're willing to join Iwa for towards the unification and also towards peace, please give another big round of applause. Well, there are wars going on at this world right now. The Russian-Ukraine war that we know broke out in February last year. And also this year we have the Israel and Hamas war. I believe the women and the children are the ones who are suffering at this kind of conflicts. So at this moment, under the topic of women and girls in conflict situation and mainstreaming gender in peace building, we're going to hear a keynote speech from Ms. Lim Al-Salem, who was appointed the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls in July 2021 by UN Human Rights Council and serve as a 3-year tenure starting from August 1st, 2021. Well, before we welcome her to the stage, I would like to give you a brief introduction of her career. Well, Al-Salem is an independent consultant specializing in gender right issues and also refugees, migrant rights, transitional justice, and humanitarian response. She has an extensive experience working with the UN entities such as UN Women and OHCHR, UNICEF, and also the IOM. Well, after the keynote address, we will be having a conversation with Ms. Kang Min-hee, who serves in the World Health Organization from 2017 to 2022 as a member of the Director General's Senior Management Team. Well, as a senior advisor in the Office of Director General, Ms. Kang provided strategic advice and also the support to the senior leadership and the members of the executive management team on the UN interagency cooperation, partnership, and multilateralism. Well, having introduced two dignitaries, now I would like to first welcome UN Special Rapporteur Ms. Lim Al-Salem to the stage with a big round of applause.
Good morning. Mrs. Kim, President of Iwa Women's University, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I stand with you before you here today with gratitude for the invitation extended to me by Iwa University. I would like to thank Mrs. President, Ms. Kim, as well as Professor Park and their students for their wonderful hospitality while I'm here in Korea. And it's also a deep honor to be able to stand before you here today to speak to a very important issue, namely that of the situation of women and girls in times of conflict and the importance of including them in peace building. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, and on November 25th, 2023, the world commemorated the International Day for the Elimination of All Forms of Violence Against Women. This annual observance serves as a stark reminder of the pervasive challenges faced by women and girls globally. In fact, without even talking about women and girls in conflict, we all should know that at least 1 in 3 women, that's around 736 million, are subjected to physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or sexual violence from a non-partner. And today, I want to focus actually on another situation where women and girls face a lot of violence, namely the violence they experience in conflict zones from actors involved in a conflict or also from repressive regimes. And I know many of you may ask, why am I focusing on women and girls? Why do I feel the need to speak about women and girls? Let me be very clear that we are not suggesting that men and boys do not have also the right to safety and security and are not protected by human rights law and international humanitarian law. They are, of course, and they are entitled to have their safety needs met and for them to be protected. What we are saying, however, is that in addition to being humans that need to be protected, women and girls have very specific needs that emanate from the fact that they are mostly female, right? So that creates another set of needs and another set of risks that is very specific to them. And this is what we need to spotlight the attention on, because it is often forgotten. So the reason I also want to speak about this is because today we see a proliferation of brutal conflicts around the world. The UN Secretary General, in his report on women, peace, and security of this year, estimated that there's around 200 armed conflicts and violent extremist situations in the world today. And as if this was not alarming in itself, we have to think about conflict today as just being one layer of global challenges, because the reality of conflict is also exacerbated by the consequences of COVID-19, which we all went through, and by the way, which also exacerbated violence for women, especially domestic violence. We then have the layer of the food crisis, the global food crisis, and then to top it all off, we also have the global climate crisis. So really we have a very alarming situation where we have multiple crises interacting together. And this interaction is also creating very specific challenges and consequences for women and girls. Now, as also the UN Secretary General said, a growing share of the world's population today is living under autocratic rule after years of democratic backsliding. And one thing that's very particular to autocratic regimes or repressive regimes is that misogyny is a common thread to the rise of these autocratic and authoritarian regimes, and is also a common thread to the spread of extremisms. So, what are the very gendered experiences of women and girls in conflict? Well, one of the very concerning trends that we've noticed is that women and girls often become the primary targets of warring parties, of groups of repressive regimes, so they are often subjected to recurrent violent acts and unspeakable horrors during war. What is alarming in all of this is that rape and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence are often used as a weapon of war. That includes sexual violence, that includes forced prostitution, trafficking, forced pregnancy, sexual slavery. In fact, the list can be very long. And across the world, sexual violence continues to be used as a deliberate strategy to subjugate, to break, and at times destroy the opponent, and to intimidate the population that is seen as the enemy. These atrocities, of course, constitute war crimes. They can be crimes against humanity, and they can even amount to genocide. And women and girls bear the brunt of that because they are seen often as the most vulnerable part of any given community. So if their communities are being targeted because of their ethnic, racial, or religious identity, then their women and girls will be targeted often first as a way to subjugate that community and to break it. And if this is allowed to go on today, it is in part due to the failure of states to prevent such atrocities from happening, due to the failure of the international community to prevent them from happening and from holding perpetrators, whether they are state or non-state actors, accountable. The other concerning thing we are seeing is that generally there is a set of fundamental human rights that women and girls have been enjoying, that we may have taken for granted, and that are now also backsliding during conflict. I refer to rights like the right to access education. I refer to rights such as the right to freedom of movement, and also the right to seek health services, including sexual and reproductive health services. And one country where I can think of where all these rights have been threatened in a very significant way for women and girls is Afghanistan, where, as you may know, the Taliban, since they have retaken power, have issued more than 50 edicts to suppress women, to undermine their fundamental rights, and to control them. So therefore, yeah, it's a grim picture. I will not hide that. And of course, also the other concerning aspect about this panorama is that women's ability to participate in decision-making on peace and security is unfortunately also declining. Events of political violence targeting women increased by 50% in conflict-affected countries between 2020 and 2022. Now, I would like to invite you all to think about the violence that women and girls are subjected to during conflict, not as something, let's say, that starts suddenly. We have to look at it as a continuum. And what I mean by that is that if in a certain country preceding a conflict, the legal framework for protecting human rights, including the legal framework for protecting women and girls, is very weak, or at times non-existent, or has a lot of gaps, then that means that it will be even easier to violate women and girls' rights and to disregard them once the conflict starts. Because also it means that the judicial apparatus, that the policies in place in order to prevent violence against women and girls and to respond to the needs of survivors is very weak, is fragile, and therefore that will be overrun when conflict starts. And women and girls that then become survivors of violence or victims of violence really have nobody to turn to once a conflict starts. So this is, for example, one thing we see very clearly with regards to domestic violence. If in a country prior to the outbreak of war, domestic violence is not dealt with adequately, then it will certainly not be dealt with after a conflict breaks out. And we know that conflicts, war, and crises in general do lead to an intensification of domestic violence inside a family. Now, the absence of effective documentation and investigation into the egregious violations that are perpetuated during conflict by both state and non-state actors, so that includes also armed and criminal groups, it includes colonial settlers, it includes mercenaries, as well as the non-implementation of required legislative and other policy measures to prevent such violence, punish those responsible, close the gap of accountability, and provide survivor-centric, transformative, and gender-sensitive reparations, this all emboldens perpetrators and leads to the re-victimization of survivors. The impunity for perpetrators or for their actions is exacerbated also by the failure to put in place a democratic international financial system to ensure that taxes are shared and illicit financial flows are prevented. In such circumstances where states continue to engage in repression and human rights violations, we must, however, continue to remind them of their international human rights obligation. So what I'm trying to say here is that no matter how challenging the situation is, no matter how many violations an actor has committed, we have to not only name and shame them, of course that is important, but we have to find ways to dialogue even with those that are committing human rights abuses. We have to find ways to keep reminding them about their human rights responsibilities and to bring about change. This is our responsibility as human rights actors and as human rights mechanisms. Now, the proposed, I think there are ways, of course, of bringing about more accountability at the international level. Of course, we know that many of the international treaties, like the Geneva Conventions, and you know, the CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and other key treaties also address the issue of violence against women and girls. But I would like to also propose that in the future treaty on crimes against humanity, we also include sexual and gender-based crimes, because that would be an important milestone towards adopting a gender-sensitive lens. It would also increase accountability, and it would also place more pressure on states to prevent and punish gender-based violence in times of peace and in times of conflict. Now, these are sort of the issues that address the prevention and that address the responsibilities of states with regards to women and girls. But there is another set of responsibilities during conflict that is no less important, which is the responsibility to allow women and girls that are fleeing their countries because of persecution, because of repression, to seek and find asylum and to find safe refuge, particularly when they have fled gender-based forms of violence. So when they have fled the kind of things that I've just described, like rape, like sexual violence, other forms of sexual violence, trafficking, child marriage, female genital mutilation. These are all forms of persecutions that are very gendered and that affect, in their majority, women and girls. So they must be able to find safety when they flee their homes because of these situations. And when they arrive in a country, they must be able to have not only legal protection, but they also have to have access to assistance and support, including psychological support in order to help them deal with the immense trauma that they have been suffering. Because unless that issue is dealt with, they will never be able to start again and rebuild their lives. So therefore, it is imperative that all actors, including individuals, governments, and non-government entities and organizations that are tasked with responding to the humanitarian and protection needs of the affected population in conflict and post-conflict situations, are also able to access this population that has arrived or that continues to be displaced in a country as a result of the war, to be able to access them, to be able to reach them. Because right now, also what we see in many countries affected by conflict is that the security situation doesn't allow them to flee, but also it doesn't allow humanitarian organizations and organizations belonging to the state to actually reach these people and to help them. So they end up being trapped and they end up being more vulnerable to abuse. So that also requires that we ensure that civil society organizations, which are often at the front line of helping a society that is affected by conflict, are also able to work in safety and security, and for them to also reach the affected population. It also means that we have to help civil society organizations, including women rights organizations and women human rights defenders, in order to continue to operate, in order to continue to provide services, in order to continue to advocate for the needs of women and girls in humanitarian settings. And for that, states must provide financial and political support to these women rights organizations. I say this because actually women human rights organizations and civil society organizations have also often been targeted with attacks because of the work they do and because they are women organizations. So just to give you an example, between May 2021 and April 2022, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights had documented incidents of reprisals against 172 women and girls human rights defenders because they were cooperating with the United Nations on human rights issues. And in 2022, 34 women human rights defenders were killed in that year alone in conflict-affected countries. And of course, we know that the real numbers are much, much bigger, that this is just a fraction of the reality. Now, we also have to ensure that the rights of women to freedom of peaceful assembly and association in times of conflict is also upheld and facilitated. Because unless they can do that, they will not be able to advocate for the protection of civilians and for the provision of services also for women and girls victims of conflict-related gender-based violence, including sexual violence. And they will not be able to also mobilize to ensure women's voices are heard and that they are able to be meaningfully included in any conflict resolution efforts. And mind you, this right to participation for women is not a luxury. It's actually a right that is firmly rooted in the principles of equality and non-discrimination and is very much enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and international humanitarian and human rights law. These rights are vital to ensure public participation of women so that they can influence laws and policies and so that they can guarantee effective women's rights protection in conflict and in periods of transition. Now, in addition to being disproportionately affected by conflict, women have also a crucial role to play in conflict resolution, in peace building and recovery processes. And despite the fact that we all know this, and despite the fact that the international frameworks protect this right through, for example, Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, it is disheartening to know that women continue to this day to be strongly underrepresented in formal peace processes. So while women participate in 80% of the UN-led or co-led peace processes, their actual number in the total number of peace processes remains very low. It's only 16% of the total participants. And that is a proportion that has decreased for 2 years in a row. So some of the, for example, peace processes or political talks where women were almost completely absent was, for example, those that were happening in Ethiopia, in Kosovo, Sudan, Myanmar, and Libya, and these are just to name a few. Another issue of concern when it comes to peace building is that even in those places where peace agreements have been reached, they are being implemented very, very slowly. This is, for example, the case, or was the case in Colombia. And what is also more concerning here is that many of these peace agreements have provisions related to gender. So how, to deal with gender-based crimes that were committed during a conflict, how to encourage victims to come forward. So many peace agreements do actually speak to these issues. But then in a number of settings where peace agreements are being implemented, these gender-related provisions are the ones to be implemented the slowest, or sometimes they get compromised and fall off the map altogether. This despite the fact that we know that the full participation of women and girls is crucial, is indispensable for ensuring a meaningful and lasting global peace and stability. Now, I want to be also clear here that everything I've mentioned about women participating in peace processes is not possible if, as I said, the safety and security of those participating in peace processes can be guaranteed, if women's organizations and women human rights defenders receive the political and financial support to allow that to happen, and also if they are able to receive also psychological support in order to help them deal with the trauma that they had to deal with so far. And sometimes there are other very compelling issues that they need to also have in place before they can meaningfully participate. Many women, including in this country, I think, North Koreans, Korean women are separated from their family members. They have lost their children on the way, they don't know where they are. So this keeps many women in a perpetual status of anxiety and despair, and traps them unable to move on and to rebuild their lives. So a few of these issues need to be resolved, I think, before women can fully step into their full potential and to fully participate in a very present way. Now, and while women may have been excluded from formal mediation roles in many situations of crisis around the world, as I've said, that is not to say that they are not doing an incredible amount of work on the ground. It's often women human rights defenders that are leading the way in terms of meeting the immediate needs of their communities, and in many places they continue actually to mediate tensions between members of their communities and, for example, the host community, or between different ethnic and religious communities. So they are playing really an important role, irrespective of whether they are included in formal peace-building or mediation processes. So I will stop here. I'll be very happy also to discuss how these general issues that we see at a global level apply to the Korean Peninsula. So I'll be also very interested to hear from the students what their thoughts are on that. But I think that to conclude, really for me, the extent to which women and children, including girls, are protected during armed conflict and its aftermath, and are included in peace-building processes, is the real litmus test of the international community's commitment to gender equality, and also its commitment to implementing international human rights frameworks that are gender equal and gender inclusive. So thank you very much.